in this fourth part of the dimensional gates, and how it does sound like a TV series, I did not think that it would go this long, but once more, when you start to work on the topics, they just begin to overflow. You will see some varieties on the matter. The other day we were analyzing many biblical texts. That gave us proof, clear proof, that there is more than what we may have thought of until now in that conduct to heaven. And also we were talking about God's technology. I know there are still people that doubt and say, but does God really need technology? God doesn't need anything, but he can use technology in the same way that the angels have it, as we saw. So we will see even more things on this, not today, about this precisely. We are going to see different things, but they are all intertwined exactly in the same thing. Now let's move on to the section of Hollywood. Once more, in the cinemas, these things are all talked about, the ones that we've been talking about here. Remember, in Star Wars, many years ago, when there was an image that impacted many people when they were in the cinema watching the movie, which is this one, when they say hyperspace and suddenly all the stars moving at breakneck speed, and they enter in this hyperspace. Well, these are concepts that they were already transmitting to us. Let's carry on, because in the cinemas today, a movie that has just came out a few days ago about the Avengers of the Marvel comics, we're going to see also that the plot of the movie develops on a certain thing, and that is this, a dimensional gate. In these scenes, between these two people, these two actors, the dialogue that they have is, the cube is an entrance to the other side of space, right? You can go in from both sides. The concept is quite clear. Later on, I haven't seen it, but they've told me that a spiral is formed where it opens and from out of it certain characters appear. I've even been told that one of the characters that comes out has two horns, if I heard properly. So if from a certain dimensional hole a character like that comes out from it, well, the concept is left quite clear of what can happen, right? We've been talking about not only is there only one way to go to Jerusalem, and that's it, of these things, but the devil also descends from another place, along with his fallen angels, through other conducts. Let's also see then a video that is very surprising of a phenomenon that was filmed in the skies of Moscow in October of 2009. Let's enter the video.
Европейскими центральными банками, которые в 2008-2009 годах реализовали лишь 155 тонн металла при квоте в 500 тонн. С начала года золото подорожало уже на 18%, а с сентября прошлого года на 42%. Валюта. Индекс доллара дешевеет в корзине основных мировых валют на 0,2%. Пара евро-доллар торгуется в отметке 1,4726, соотношение пары доллар-иена 88,14.
This that's happened in Moscow, as you can see, it's no fiction. We do not know if this was by questions of harp, or by the harp system, or dealing the topic that we are dealing, and the shape that it has. It is something more than that. Be that as it may, it is not the last strange thing that has been seen in Moscow. Let's see also this other video, and if what we are going to see is another dimensional gate. Be that as it may, definitely they are curious images. We do not know if provoked by man or if truly we are seeing how these things work and how they were described in the Bible. That they could really look like this. Now we are going to talk about scientific theories. The Great Hadron Collider, a dimensional gate. You know that is in Switzerland, that has been much talked about because it was so expensive, and that if it failed and the test didn't go right, then etc. etc. Many people had theories that they were looking for something else with what could happen in that place. And look at what appeared related to all of this. A superior military scientist of the Large Hadron Collider says that the Titanic machine possibly can create or discover scientific phenomenon that never had been imagined or unknown. For example, an extra dimension. Something could come out of this gate, or we could send something through it, said Sergio Bertoluzzi, that is, Director of Investigation and Computation of the CERN, included in the press conference of the CERN at the beginning of this week. We are talking about the 6th of November of 2009. These scientists that are in these scopes seem that they are looking for something more than what is happening to the public knowledge, apparently, and we can see what it can be related with. Later we will see if someone knew more about these things, some scientists from some years ago. Here there is a whole explanation coming from the CERN, and look, between other things of what they are looking for there, to have answers to if there are extra dimensions, just how is predicted by different models through the string theory, and if affirmative, why has it not been able to be perceived? The string theory, having to do with vibrations that deal with different dimensions. Well, they are looking to see if all of this is true or not. You can see with what it is all related. A news that also came out that caused much controversy. CERN finds particles that move faster than light. You know that this came out on September of 2011, 1 year ago, and then the idea was scuttled because the trials probably had failed because of a cause, and they did have to try and find where was a failure. And it seems that they found the failure where those particles could not be found. But they were working to find more particles that could move faster than light. The CERN, in any case, insisted on Thursday that nothing was official or conclusive. In the largest physics laboratory in the world, work has been going on for years to try to find out if it is possible to register speeds greater than that of light. They are not still, they are working with these things. The LHC searches for parallel universes. High-energy physics experiments may show that there are more dimensions than we think. What things, right? And here they talk a bit about the accelerator of particles. And we can see how it is on the inside, how it's a tremendous infrastructure, but they are talking about those parallel universes that they are looking for. They even call it the God machine. Let's see what it says here. For decades, physicists have burned their eyelashes trying to determine if the universe really has the 4 dimensions of all life, 3 physical and 1 temporal, or if there are others that by their nature we cannot perceive. String theory, for example, postulates that the particles of our universe, such as electrons or protons, are not a mere point with no internal structure and of 0 dimension, but a tiny string that vibrates in a space-time of more than 4 dimensions. Its defenders believe that these strings do not move in ordinary 4-dimensional space-time, Kaluza-Klein type, but rather in 6 additional, compacted dimensions giving rise to a 10-dimensional universe, 1 temporal, 3 spatial, normal, and 6 minimized and undetectable for now. The CERN physicists who investigate the origins of the universe hope that in 2011 they will be able to obtain, thanks to the LHC, the first concrete evidence of these hidden dimensions. Well, at the moment we are in 2012 and nothing has been said that they have found anything of this. That they have found it or not, well, I don't know if we will get to know it, but they are working on these things, and maybe with others that they don't tell us, but we don't know this. The Director General of CERN, Rolf Huer, is hopeful that by analyzing the data generated by the accelerator, some evidence of these, perhaps misnamed parallel universes will appear. How can we know that one of these hidden dimensions really exists? CERN physicists believe that by analyzing the accelerator data, they could find traces of a particle disappearing for a very brief period of time, only to reappear again. If this happens, one of the possible explanations would be that the particle in question has slipped into one of these 6 hidden dimensions and then returned to the universe we all know. This, if its existence occurs and is proven, does not mean that we have even remotely the possibility of exploring or traveling to these parallel universes. We would only have proven that the intimate structure of matter is different from what is normally accepted, which of course is not a small thing. Well, you can see that these are concepts that, for us that are not in the scientific area, especially in physics and so on, these concepts can be missed. But it is true that people that are normally involved in more esoteric concepts, although they might think that what they believe has nothing to do with this, they do talk about these string theories and these universal vibrations, etc., etc. You know that where there is smoke, and in a satanic manner there is smoke and a lot, there can be fire also. You know that God does things and Satan plagiarizes them and gives them his twist to distort things and take people where he wants. This would be a trip through a black hole. This is what we would see if we managed to go through one of these cosmic tunnels in which space and time are deformed to the point of improbability. This is a recreation of a black hole. Firstly, we're going to pass on a series of images and afterwards some videos. This is not an artist's rendering, but a rigorous simulation performed on a supercomputer programmed to faithfully follow the rules of general relativity. The result, obtained by astrophysicist Andrew Hamilton from the University of Colorado at Boulder, is a video of what we would see if we could travel through a black hole to any place in the universe. An amazing trip where they are, and very far, by the way, from the reach of current technology. Of our technology. Of ours. Let's see if you can perceive here some kind of structure in this black sphere with these partitions in red. That could remind you of something that we already saw on a documentary that we passed on in the first part of this series of conferences. Well, let's carry on reading. Here it says, suppose we want to go to Andromeda, the closest neighbor to our galaxy, the Milky Way. Andromeda is 2 million light years away from us, which means that even if we could travel at the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second, which we cannot, it would take us 2 million years to get there. And that's supposing that we could cross through there and that nothing would happen to us, right? With our technology, it would be, well, at the speed of light. With a super improved technology, well, we would take all of this time. And where is heaven then? Because if Daniel started to pray and the angel is given the order and he is standing there practically in an instant, wow, then what a solution that the angels have that we are not even dreaming of. But anyway, let's continue. However, physics gives us another way, at least in theory, to reach our goal, and that way is none other than to plunge headlong into a black hole. a place where space and time are deformed to the point of implausibility, to then exit through the other end and emerge from a white hole right at the chosen destination. Well, these are quite some concepts, right? Now, thanks to Hamilton's efforts, and although such a trip is not possible with current means, we can get a pretty good idea of what we would see if we would actually go through one of these space-time tunnels. Of course, if we were to dive on our feet into a real black hole, our bodies would start to stretch out like a spaghetti, since the enormous gravity would pull on our feet much harder than on our heads. So we would end up like a noodle. And that is if we are not vaporized before by the energetic jets that emanate from the hole. But Hamilton, in his visualization, assumes that the traveler is endowed with superpowers and will easily survive the experience. Well, of course, because if not, well, it just wouldn't come out, would it? Now, the image of the entire universe. The first thing to do, then, is to let yourself be trapped by the black hole. Gravity will inevitably pull us towards it until we cross the event horizon, the point of no return from which nothing, not even light, can reverse. But let's go in parts. We would first pass through the outer horizon of the hole, where reality would still be quite familiar to us, and continue in free fall towards the inner horizon. That's where things would start to look really weird. The first thing we would see would be a burst of light from the outside world, an infinitely energetic light that would contain an image of the complete history of the entire universe. These are theories. As we approach the exit, we would enter a wormhole, a place where the flow of space is reversed, and we would feel ourselves start to accelerate again, although this time outwards. The wormhole ends right at the entrance to a white hole, which is an inverted version of a black hole. Here, space falls out rather than in, and at an apparent speed much greater than the speed of light. It is the moment when another flash of radiation is produced, a luminous flash that this time contains the image of the entire future of the universe. What concepts, right? As we move through the white hole, we get closer to its outer horizon. When we reach it, a third flash occurs, but this time what appears is a new universe, in an image that contains the entirety of its past. If we look through the white hole from which we have just emerged, we can see the image of the old universe. In other words, on our trip we would have broken two barriers, that of space and that of time. For this reason, behind us we could still see the original universe from which we came, and ahead, a new universe, a replica of the precious one, but with us in Andromeda, 2 million light-years from our starting point. And now we are going to see two consecutive videos in which precisely we show these images and others of a journey into a black hole.
Black holes are among the simplest objects in the universe. They are simpler than stars, much simpler than planets, and vastly simpler than human beings. Black holes are what is created when matter is compressed into a very small place. They are general relativity's most extreme prediction. They are commonly created from the deaths of stars many times the size of our Sun, usually forming from the collapsed core of a supergiant star after it explodes. At the heart of a black hole is a singularity, an infinitesimal point in space where the pull of gravity is infinitely strong and space-time infinitely curved. At the singularity, space and time no longer exist as we know them. So what would happen if we traveled into one? To answer this question, let's look at a simple black hole, one with mass but doesn't spin or have any electric charge. This animation shows our descent. At the lower left is a graph showing our trajectory. The green region is a safe zone where our spacecraft orbit around the black hole is stable and we can still get out. The yellow region is a risky zone where our orbit is unstable. Here, a short burst of our maneuvering thrusters will send us either into the black hole or off into outer space. The orange region is a danger zone where there are no possible orbits for our spacecraft, stable or unstable. To remain in orbit in this zone, we must constantly keep firing our rockets. The closer to the horizon we get, the harder we must fire our rockets to keep from falling in. The red line is the horizon. From here, there is no escape. At the bottom right of the animation is a clock, which records the time left until we arrive at the central singularity. The clock records our proper time, the time we experience, the time on our wristwatch. In this animation, the clock slows down not because time is slowing down, but because it is more interesting to run the movie slower nearer the singularity, so that we can see more clearly what happens there. As we begin our approach, we can immediately see the distortion of light around the edges of the black hole. This is the gravity well bending light, lensing the light from the background stars into long circular arcs. The event horizon is depicted as a red grid. This marks the boundary beyond which nothing can escape, not even light. Notice that we can see both the north and the south poles of the black hole simultaneously. Since the black hole bends light around it, we can see all around and into the back of the black hole at the same time we see the front. This horizon is called the Schwarzschild radius. About 3 Schwarzschild radii marks the location of the innermost stable orbit, the green area in our trajectory. Here, circular orbits are stable. Beyond, they are unstable. Any material accreting around this black hole finds its innermost edge here. Anything slightly closer falls into the black hole. So long as we remain in this region, we can still get out. At about 2 Schwarzschild radii, we reach the risky zone, an area of unstable orbits. Any slip up here, such as a small firing of our thrusters, would randomly send us either headlong into the black hole or flying away from it. Also in this region, we arrive at a special location known as the photon sphere, the distance where light rays can remain in orbit. This is the closest to the black hole that anything can get and remain in orbit. For our rocket to stay here, our thrusters would have to expend an infinite amount of energy. As we fall through the horizon at 1 Schwarzschild radius, something quite unexpected happens. Instead of falling through the red grid that marks the horizon, it stands off ahead of us. The horizon splits into 2 distinct entities, the horizon and the anti-horizon. Light from both of them hit us as we pass. The true horizon becomes visible only after we have fallen through. The anti-horizon continues to remain ahead of us, and we never fall through it. It is a common misconception that if you fall inside the horizon of a black hole, you will be engulfed in blackness. What happens instead, the universe appears brighter and brighter as you approach the horizon, tending to infinite brightness at the horizon. By this time in our journey, however, none of us would be able to sense any of this. Once inside, space is falling faster than light, carrying us inexorably inward. Here, we are now at 0.8 Schwarzschild radii. As we fall, in a typical sized black hole such as ours, the tidal forces are weak enough that we can fall deep inside the horizon before we are torn apart. The gravity at our feet is stronger than the gravity at our heads. We feel this difference as a tidal force, which pulls us apart vertically. At the same time, we are crushed in the horizontal direction, like a rubber band being pulled. Finally, as we approach the singularity and we look up one last time, we see that the intense gravity of the black hole has concentrated the view of the outside universe into a thin band around our waist. The views above and below are dim and redshifted, while the view around our waist is bright and blue shifted. We never actually get to see the center of the black hole because all light is rushing towards it and none away from it. Sadly, we will never reach our final destination of the central singularity. Our journey ends just short of our goal. Approximately 1/10 of a second before we reach the singularity, we would be torn apart by the tidal forces. This happens regardless of the mass of the black hole. In all black holes of any size, our journey will end at roughly the same spot. We will never reach the point of infinite curvature, where space and time as we know them have come to an end.
What is interesting of this video that we've shown, well, here they're giving a whole explanation of the functioning. The interesting part overall is that you could realize that these images, when they entered the black hole, would be the images in red that made a certain kind of drawing. And if you remember the first video that we shown in the first batch of this series about dimensional gates, we saw how precisely a certain kind of energies were shown that were moving the whole universe and that were reflected in many different things. If you've noticed, the functionality of that image, of that diagram, continues to be the same thing. And the man that said that for the first time when we showed the documentary, the main character, to say it in some way, he said he saw it in a vision on a bus, if you remember, right? Now let's enter precisely to see a bit the perspective of some things that we've seen until now, but from the dark side. Understand me, from things that do not come from God, but from the enemy. First, let's read a biblical text. Genesis chapter 3, verse 13, and this does come from God, to show things already from the beginning. And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that you have done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. And verse 15 says, God refers these words to him, And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So who is he referring these words to? Who was this serpent? Well, it was an animal. But who spoke through using a serpent, the first demonic possession of all history that made humanity succumb, making it go into a rebellion against God in sin? This was Satan introducing himself in the body of that serpent, of that reptile, and from that point afterwards we can see the divine sentence speaking against that serpent, but not referring only to the serpent, but to Satan, who obtained the possession of that body, that there would be enmity between that serpent and its seed, meaning those that would follow the things of Satan, and between the woman and her seed, which would end up being the humanity in general, but especially someone that would come from that seed, that would come to be the Messiah, Jesus. Here it is showing us that the first enemy of humanity, and that is still behind bigger things that we will still see after all of this, and of that first vision that that man had to understand certain mechanisms of the universe, etc., etc., and that ancient cultures already comprehended, that we already saw, is reflected in the serpent, in the reptile. Why am I telling you this? Because the fight between good and evil existed since practically the origin of humanity here on earth. But it was already in heaven. Satan was a reptile? Was Lucifer a reptile? Did he have a head of a serpent, a snake, or something like that? No. But on the other hand, taking possession of the body of the serpent, the symbology of Satan passes on to be the serpent. That is why all the ancient cultures worshipped serpents. But they worshipped also dragons. In verse 14, that does not appear here, it is when God says to the serpent, he curses it, causing it from that moment to drag on its belly. Why? Because before the serpents could fly. And in this manner we can now understand why cultures like China worship the dragon, because it is the same thing of the ancient serpent that used to fly. And it is worship to Satan. And all cultures, like those of the American Indians, they worshipped a feathered serpent. It is all the worldwide culture from 6,000 years ago of the seed of the serpent. Those that have followed Satan, that did not want to be the people of God, and that have always participated in satanic things, and of very, very true concepts, occult from the rest of the population that they knew. And from there, so many secret societies with ancient concepts that truly are not all wrong, and that they exceed us in knowledge, but evidently their knowledge has not always been given by God. And it's not that God deprives his people of knowledge. He does give it, but Satan has wanted to filter them quickly to the people from time immemorial, and still now, to carry out his purposes and divert from things that God knows has done and continues doing, just in the culminating point, so that the people that find things surprising, and that can be very true, they are diverted just precisely at the point to draw them away from God and take them to the dark side. Now that we can see who is behind of those famous reptilians that they say that come in UFOs to our earth, and that they have been gods, Sumerian gods, etc., etc., what it truly is the representation of Satan, and of course his angels that participate in the same thing. Therefore, we can see once more how Satan, in his origins, he already started to detract the things of God. And it stayed as concepts and symbologies what Satan wanted to introduce to the people. And the serpent continues being a symbol of worship in all of these places, or the dragon. Let's see precisely in this dark side an interpretation that is given of the dream, the night vision of Jacob's ladder. You know, we already presented it here when Jacob goes to Bethel and he starts to see that ladder that reaches up to heaven with its base put on the floor, and that the angels of God ascend and descend on that ladder. And he says, House of God, gates to heaven. You know, Ellen White, you're not going to see it now, maybe in the next stage of the conferences. She talks about also the symbolism of that ladder. The literality is one thing, and another thing is the symbology or the teaching that we can extract from it. We know by the spirit of prophecy that that ladder is like climbing up those steps. That is the way of growing in the Christian character. You go up steps up to God, but those steps that you have to climb up is through Christ, because Christ is the one that has the symbology of that ladder, without which earth and heaven would be completely impossible to be communicated. Christ is that bridge, that ladder, and the Christian character improves as you go up that ladder, which represents Christ, who takes us to God, and the character is perfected. Well, look how curiously, once more, Satan always works in things that are practically the same, to deviate things as always at its culminating point. Freemasonry talks about Jacob's ladder, and here you have a representation in which you can see a ladder placed on the famous floor, like the chessboard, as you know, like the contrast between good and evil, black and white, the balance, and that ladder that is on the floor leaning on a book with something more there. Under this man sitting on the ladder, it has different steps, and we can see this woman halfway up the ladder with the key, and then at the top there's another character, and above you can see such heavenly concepts. Well, we are going to see what they say in Freemasonry about these concepts. Well, there are more symbols around here, but we are not going to talk about them now. Jacob's ladder is an emblem of the virtues and spiritual qualities of the soul. It has 7 steps that correspond to the 7 planets. Have you ever seen before that in any moment the Bible or Ellen White mention 7 steps? No. But they already have that number 7 and they put it here, which is perfection, indicating the progress or progressive elevation of man in successive states of conscience. As you can see, always talking about states of consciousness, to go up from the material to the divine. The states or conditions of consciousness, as well as thoughts, rise towards the sky as aspirations and manifest in us as inspirations. These are the angels and archangels of God. Well, what explanations? Messengers or expressions of the divine who go up and down the ladder, which are, according to Jacob's expression, house of God and gate of heaven. Well, look how it is mixing concepts, right? The same Tower of Babel arose with a similar purpose as indicated by its name, which also means door of God. You realize what I showed in the previous conference? Satan plagiarizes that of which is of God. Babel was something more than just a simple tower to run away from a possible flood, because they were also looking for that. The 7 steps or doors of the ladder are considered respectively formed of lead, copper, iron, tin, amalgams, silver and gold, corresponding to the 7 planets that dominate over these metals, and to the virtues of prudence, temperance, fortitude, justice, faith, hope and charity. And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he came upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place, and put them for his pillows, and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid, and said, How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Look, they are using the biblical text that we were using. And Jacob rose up early in the morning, and took the stone that he had put for his pillows, and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz at first. So, as you can see, they quote this precisely, Genesis 28, verse 10 to 19. Let us consider within the esoteric symbolism of Jacob's ladder that the angels properly represent the superior states of being. The ladder must be considered supported on the ground by its lower part, which means that for us, our world itself is the support from which the ascent must be made. Well, they say things that are true and others that are a bit different. Let's remember the last part of Jacob's dream. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid, and said, How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning, and took the stone that he had put for his pillows, and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz at first. The Greek word omphalos means navel, but it designates in a general way everything that is center. The symbol of the omphalos could be placed in a place that was simply the center of a certain region, spiritual center. On the other hand, rather than a geographical center, although the two may have coincided in certain cases, but if this is the case, it is because such a point was truly for the people who inhabited the considered region the visible image of the center of the world. Now, pay attention, because what you are seeing now is a Kabbalistic interpretation. And in these cases, they are not always wrong, and sometimes they say things that we do not think of and that are true, but they mix it always with something that is not correct. But what they are saying here is true. This is as it is. The material representation of the omphalos will generally be a sacred stone, which is often called betel. And this last word does not seem to be anything other than the Hebrew Beit El, house of God. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The idea of the ladder, we must understand it as long as a perpetual upward and downward movement is carried out. Allowing such movements to take place is indeed the essential destiny of the ladder. The ladder suggests some observations. Its two vertical rungs correspond to the duality of the tree of knowledge, or in the Hebrew Kabbalah, to the two columns, the one on the right and the one on the left, of the Sephirotic tree. You realize how now they go much further on. They start grabbing the symbology and they apply it in a Kabbalistic way with the Sephirotic tree, etc., etc. This is where we enter satanic things in a super subtle way. The tree of knowledge. You know who transmitted the knowledge to them? Who was the bringer of light? Lucifer, not God. We know that Lucifer means light bringer, but for them he still is the one that brings the light, not God. Lucifer could not be called Lucifer anymore. Now his name is Satan, adversary, devil, old serpent. It is seen that the ladder thus offers a very complete symbolism. It is, one could say, like a vertical bridge that rises through all the worlds and allows us to go through its entire hierarchy, going from rung to rung, and at the same time the rungs are the worlds themselves, that is to say, the different levels created by universal existence. Let's make a brief summary with the main symbolic elements that can be revealed around Jacob's ladder. Jacob's ladder is the emblem of the virtues and spiritual qualities of the soul. Well, is this wrong? No. In a certain way, it is like this. The states of consciousness of the human being rise towards the sky as aspirations and manifest in us as inspirations. These are the angels and archangels of God coming down the ladder. Well, you can see that they enter some quite strange concepts. The figure of Jacob's ladder looms as essential elements in the earthly and spiritual world, that is to say, an omphalos. The ladder offers a symbolism that is identified with a vertical bridge that rises through all the worlds towards divinity. The meaning of the ascent and of each step taken through Jacob's ladder is related to the superior states of evolution and also to different degrees of initiation. Can you see? This is where the details of the degrees of initiation comes in. What does Freemasonry consist of? There are degrees, right? Different kinds of levels. That's you, since you begin, since you initiate, you ascend. They are applying the occult concepts of Masonry to what? To Jacob's ladder. Can you see how easy it is to detract with some arguments that seem as true because it is nearly all true? These sciences could only be traditional sciences understood in their deepest and most properly esoteric sense. Impressive, right? Well, you can see how they deal with this issue. And you can see that they talk also about passing through other worlds until to arrive to the maximum, the Most High. Well, now let's continue in the dark side. Remember this game, right? That so many times we've presented cards that belong to it. Illuminati New World Order card game. This is the box scanned so that you can see it properly. And look at what appears on these cards. UFO matter. You can see the typical big head with that strange face and those weird eyes. put inside of what? A triangle. Let's see what else appears. Ah, look, once more in this card also. UFOs appear, and what else? Martians. Well, yeah, there are monsters and locusts, giants on top of buildings, and cows. Well, let's continue. More UFO things. And also, what else appears? What we saw in a previous conference, the crop circles done on sown fields, making strange drawings, right? Well, all of this appears in this card game. They also have introduced it because there is something to do with the UFO thing, related with all of this. And now we are going to talk precisely about someone that you could say, what does Nikola Tesla have to do with all of this? This great scientist, this great inventor, little known and little recognized in schools and universities, etc., and that was so important and much more important than Thomas Edison himself and many others of his time. And from him precisely comes the HARP system, between many other things. You can see what he has in his hand, something that glows. It is said that the inventor of the bulb was Thomas Edison, right? Yes? Well, it has been said that truly it was copied from something that this man had already done before. Today we are going to see how this man has a lot to do also with things of what we've been presenting until now, and with a certain concept that we mentioned briefly some instance ago, to do with UFOs. What? UFOs? He has to do with this? But wait a moment, don't they say that UFOs have to do with Martians and aliens? I mean, extraterrestrials that come in their spaceships from who knows where to come here to do their things? One say to control us, others to say to give us an exit from here to a time. Anyway, let's see a bit all of this, that it's about time. We already saw its relation with those things on which the angels move on. Well, now let's see more details on all of this. We are going to read quite a bit, but I think it's worth it so that you can know who was this character and what kind of things he managed to discover and manifest. Before many generations are gone, our machines are going to be moved by force from anywhere in the universe. In every universe there is energy. These words were said by the great scientist Nikola Tesla. And according to Nexus magazine, Dr. Nikola Tesla was considered one of the best known people on Earth. He today has disappeared from our scientific books and textbooks. What did he discover and why did he fall into oblivion? There are times when great men go unnoticed and forgotten, even reviled during their lives, only to recognize all their merits as soon as they die. And on occasions like this, after almost 100 years, their discoveries are still being used and research continues on their designs, theories and devices. He was a man who was ahead of his time in the broadest sense of the word. Pay attention to what you're going to see, because it definitely has no waste. Nikola Tesla was born on July 9th, 1856, in Smiljan, Croatia, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His father gave up a military career to become a priest of the Serbian Orthodox Church. His mother, though she received no formal education, was brilliant and had an exceptional memory. Tesla always said that his mother was the source of his intellectual abilities. However, the early accidental death of his brother left a mark on him for the rest of his life. Attention to this detail. He was marked for the rest of his life by the death of his brother, when he, well, you can see, was relatively young, since he considered himself guilty of that accident. And with that guilt he carried until the day of his death. Nikola Tesla was without a doubt the greatest genius of the 19th and 20th century. Our lifestyle now, the technology we take for granted, all of this is made possible by this amazing man. However, despite all his contributions to science, his name is little remembered outside of the field of physics. In fact, Thomas Edison is often erroneously credited in textbooks with inventions that were actually developed and patented by Tesla, and he is not talked about. Most scholars acknowledge that the obscurity around Tesla is partly due to his eccentric ways and fantastic claims by him during the waning years of his life to communicate with other planets and about the death rays of He. Okay, well, what is it talking about here? Communicating with other planets, death rays? It is now known that many of Tesla's fantastic inventions are scientifically valid and functional. It has simply taken humanity a long time to catch up with some of the astonishing insights of a man who died in 1943, in the middle of World War II. Tesla is known to have suffered financial problems in his adult life. Because of this, Tesla had to move continuously because he couldn't afford his housing. I would like to tell you that Tesla was also helped and financed by a man that is very known called J.P. Morgan. And there is a moment when it arrives that this man takes away all his support because this man discovered types of energy, of electricity, that could be transferred and not through cables. And precisely J.P. Morgan was the owner of copper. And of course he said to him, well, I help you until here. And very strange things started to happen to this man, to the point where all his documentation was stolen, and etc., etc. We're going to see if J.P. Morgan, precisely we've said that he is not on God's side. You couldn't say that. We'll see if this man was. We'll see things. Tesla is known to have suffered financial problems in his adult life. Because of this, Tesla had to move continuously because he couldn't afford his housing. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York was Tesla's residence for 20 years, and he had to move in 1920 when he could no longer afford it. Remember that we was talking also about the Waldorf Astoria in our conferences, because it was associated certain family that was linked to certain group of global power. He later moved into the San Regis Hotel, but was again forced to vacate due to lack of financial support. Forced to move from hotel to hotel, he often left trunks of documents behind as security for his debts. These trunks, which were eagerly sought after Tesla's death, had become the key to unlocking the mystery of who Nikola Tesla really was and the incredible life he secretly led. Well, here you have one of the images of Nikola Tesla. As you can see, what rays went out, and he was working with things to do with electricity. Tesla invented high voltage, high and low frequency waves and their terrestrial, atmospheric and solid body effects. This sounds harp. He also established the scientific basis of the dynamic theory of gravity, as well as various ways of obtaining free energy. Remember that we've been presenting modes of free energy, etc., etc.? Well, here you've got it. Around 900, Tesla directed his inventions into electropulsion especially, and carried out a series of experiments in Colorado Springs. The results of these experiments were so colossal that they left the scientists of the time speechless. There was a moment when he performed a series of experiments on certain buildings that started to wicker so much, to vibrate, that the experiment had to be stopped. Well, let's carry on, let's go on. When Tesla arrived in the US, he carried under his arm the plans for the construction of the world's first flying saucer. What? Which flew without the need for external power. He intended to present them at the Geneva Convention as a solution to achieve world peace and the release of energy. He had fantastic theories about magnetism and anti-gravity, as well as other forms of free energy. Self-propelled technology invented by Tesla was the basis for the manned spacecraft we now call flying saucers. But the United States government never gave Tesla the opportunity to put all of his findings into practice. However, Tesla's inventions were used by Nazi Germany in their Foo Fighters between 1920 and 30, and later in much more advanced devices. This is a plan of how a UFO worked. Well, let's continue. Nikola Tesla has been credited as the creator of much of the technology we have today. Without Tesla's genius, we could not have radio, television, AC electricity, the Tesla coil, fluorescent lighting, neon lights, radio control devices, robotics, X-rays, radar, microwaves, and dozens of other amazing inventions. Because of this, it is not surprising that Tesla also investigated the world of flight and possibly anti-gravity. In fact, his last patent in 1928 was for a flying machine that resembled both a helicopter and an airplane. Before he died, Tesla reportedly devised the blueprints for a spacecraft engine. He called it space drive or drive of the anti-electromagnetic field. Nikola Tesla has recently been the subject of controversy due to claims that he was involved in one of the most secret mysteries of World War II, the Philadelphia experiment, of which we were presenting here also. This experiment, also known as Project Rainbow, was supposedly an attempt by the Navy to create a ship that could not be detected by magnetic mines and/or radar. However, their results were very different and far more dangerous than the Navy would have expected. The tests would have started in the summer of 1943 and were successful to some extent at first. One test on July 22nd of 1943 rendered the USS Eldridge almost entirely invisible, with some witnesses reporting a greenish haze. However, some crew members later complained of nausea. Remember that this still remains in uncertainty. Did it truly happen? Did it not? At that time, the experiment was altered at the request of the Navy, with the aim of making the ship invisible only to radar. The equipment was recalibrated and the experiment was carried out on October 28, 1943. This time, the Eldridge not only became completely invisible to the naked eye, but actually disappeared from the area in a flash of blue. At the same time, at the US Naval Base in Norfolk, Virginia, 600 kilometers away, a crew member on its shores claimed to have seen the Eldridge for 15 minutes, at the end of which she disappeared, only to reappear in Philadelphia in her original coordinates. It was supposedly an accidental case of teleportation. By Carl Allen's account, the physiological effects on the crew were profound. Very violent dizziness, personnel who completely disappeared, others who simply went crazy, or suffered from severe schizophrenia. And the most terrifying thing was the discovery of 5 crew members completely fused with the metal structure of the ship's bow, while many others suffered dematerialization of some parts of their bodies. Supposedly, the horrified naval officers called off the experiment immediately. The survivors were never the same and remained in a kind of total amnesia. I repeat that this has still not been proved. Okay, there have been letters of the man that did the testimony of all of this, etc., but this has not been able to be proved, or at least if it were true, it stays as if it were not. We do not know it. Another invention based on Nikola Tesla's theories is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, that we all know. High Frequency Active Aurora Research Program is an ionospheric program funded by the United States Air Force and Navy. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This is DARPA. Does this ring a bell? We have been showing also some robots made by DARPA. Do you remember, right? And the University of Alaska. Its objective is to study the properties of the ionosphere and promote technological advances that allow improving its capacity to favor radio communications and surveillance systems such as missile detection. The HAARP program was the subject of controversy in the mid-1990s due to the hypothesis that the station's antennas could be used as weapons. In August 2002, HAARP technology was mentioned as a critical issue in the Russian Duma parliament. The Duma produced a press release on the HAARP program, written by the Defense and International Affairs Committees, signed by 90 representatives, and presented to then President Vladimir Putin. That has now become it again. The press release stated the following: the United States is creating new comprehensive weapons of a geophysical nature that can influence the troposphere with low-frequency radio waves. The significance of this quantum leap is comparable to the transition from bladed weapons to firearms, or from conventional weapons to nuclear weapons. This new type of weapons differs from any other known type in that the troposphere and its components become objects that can be influenced. Climate change also, hey? Geophysical weapons that we've been talking about many conferences ago. On the fourth one, if I remember properly. That is about 76 conferences ago. This project has been widely criticized and the subject of numerous conspiracy theories, accused of concealing its true purpose. Remember how this program is accused of creating earthquakes, right? And on a certain deepness, etc., etc. Reporter Sharon Weinberger called HARP the Moby Dick of conspiracies. Computer scientist David Nadich called it a theory magnet, as it has been blamed for triggering catastrophes such as floods, droughts, hurricanes, storms, and devastating earthquakes in Afghanistan and the Philippines, aimed, it is said, at combating to terrorists. Nadich also accused them of various events, including the major electrical failures of the TWA plane, Flight 800, or the Gulf Syndrome, among others. So far, no place that supports conspiracy theories has shown how it would be possible for the radio frequency waves produced by HARP to cause effects such as earthquakes. In August 2010, several Russian physicists accused the US of being behind the intense Russian heat wave that caused numerous fires and doubled mortality. They claimed that the HARP project is not just a means of research, but a powerful weapon that modifies the electric field and causes climate changes worldwide. It is not known for sure if Tesla ever used his death ray, or if he succeeded in building one. But something happened one night in 1908 when Tesla says that he tested the weapon. On June the 30th, 1908, a massive explosion had devastated Tunguska, a remote area in the Siberian desert. 500,000 acres of land had been destroyed instantly, with a power equivalent to 10 to 15 megatons of TNT. As it happened, Tunguska was the most powerful explosion that has occurred in human history, since even subsequent thermonuclear detonations have not surpassed it. You've seen images, right, of this explosion? The explosion could be heard at a distance of 620 miles. Scientists believe that it was caused by either a meteorite or a fragment of a comet, although neither the impact site nor mineral remains of said object were found. Nikola Tesla had a different explanation. It was obvious that his death ray had reached beyond its initial target and Tunguska had been destroyed. He was grateful to the fact that the explosion miraculously did not kill anyone. Tesla quickly dismantled the death ray, as he judged it too dangerous to exist. 6 years later, with World War I, Tesla came to his senses and wrote to President Wilson, disclosing his death ray test in confidence. He offered to rebuild the weapon for the War Department to be used purely as a deterrent. Only the threat of such a destructive force would force the warring nations to reach an agreement to establish a lasting peace. The only response to Tesla's proposal was a letter of appreciation from the President's secretary. It is assumed that the death ray was never rebuilt. Well, so we've seen here where did the death ray start and to where did it affect. When Tesla died on January the 7th, 1943, at the age of 86, representatives of the Office of Alien Property, at the request of the FBI, went to the New York hotels where he had stayed and seized all of his belongings. 2 truckloads of documents, furniture, and artifacts were sent to the Manhattan Warehouse and Storage Company. After Tesla's death, a plan was issued by the United States government to find all of his documents, notes, and research before other foreign powers could find them. It was known to the FBI that German intelligence had already seized a large amount of Tesla's research several years before his death. The stolen material, it is thought, would eventually lead to the development of the Nazis' flying saucers. The United States was going to make sure this didn't happen again. Nazis flying saucers? Later we're going to see some interesting things. Anything even remotely associated with this great man was quickly confiscated and stored in the secret networks of the United States before World War II. However, more than a dozen boxes of Tesla's belongings left behind at hotels like the Waldorf's Astoria, the Governor Clinton and the St. Regis had already been sold to pay off Tesla's outstanding debts. Most of these boxes and the secrets they contained have never been found. This load was added to the nearly 30 barrels and bundles that had been in storage since the 1930s, and the entire collection was sealed. Most of these boxes and the secrets they contained have never been found. In 1976, 4 indistinguishable boxes of papers were auctioned off at the sale of the estate of one Michael P. Burns, a Manhattan bookseller. This auction took place in Newark, New Jersey, with the boxes and their contents being purchased by Dale Alfrey for the sum of $25. Alfie had no idea what was in the boxes when he bought them. When he later went through them, he was surprised to find what appeared to be Nikola Tesla's laboratory documents and personal notes. Some of Tesla's lost papers had resurfaced. However, due to ignorance of their importance, they are almost lost once more in 1976. The name of Nikola Tesla was not widely known. Alfrey had no idea of the importance of the papers that now belonged to him. Reviewing an incredible amount of material, Alfrey's first thought is that he had uncovered the notes of a science fiction writer. What he read was so incredible that it seemed impossible that any of it was true. Taking little interest in what he had bought, Alfrey hid the boxes in his basement, thinking he would go through them again later, when he had more time. 20 years passed before Alfrey found the time to open the strange boxes. Unfortunately, time was not kind to the precious contents inside the boxes. By then, the papers had come badly moldy, and the ink had faded from years in the dank cellar. Alfrey was determined not to let this material disappear forever, and he began the painstaking effort of trying to transcribe the information before it was too late. However, Alfrey soon found himself caught up in reading the remarkable papers. Tesla's notes were startling in their revelations of the scientist's secret life, a life that until then had never been mentioned by Tesla or documented by his biographers. These lost journals revealed that in 1899, while in Colorado Springs, Tesla intercepted communications from extraterrestrial beings who were secretly controlling humanity. What? He says this. Was it a lie? Or did he really intercept communications from extraterrestrial beings? Careful, being extraterrestrial does not mean to come from a faraway planet and come here to fly around. Who is extraterrestrial? God? Yes. And who else? There are inhabitants of other worlds. We've seen it by quotes and biblical texts, yes. But they do not come here. So, these communications, the fallen angels, are extraterrestrials. They are not from here. Well, could it be this, what this man found? We will see more things. But you already have 2 details. One, he is affected by the death of his brother. He feels guilty and he is marked. And then, also, besides these scientific discoveries that he makes, communications with extraterrestrial beings. Let's see more things, but notice that he says here that they were controlling humanity. These creatures were preparing humans for eventual conquest and domination, using a program that had been around since the creation of humanity, but was now being accelerated due to increased scientific knowledge on Earth. What is Satan going to do? What is he going to do with his angels? What is his project? Isn't it dominate the Earth, to go against God and against his people? And isn't he prepared great things impressive phenomenons. That is what is prophesied. We are going to be mind-blown in very little time. Even more, hey? Tesla wrote about his years of research to interpret strange radio signals and his attempts to notify the government and military of what he knew. But letters from him apparently remained unanswered. Doesn't it seem strange to you that the United States government has dedicated to spend so much money, and other nations as well, in sending radio missions to space to see if they receive a response, and also build enormous antenna to receive signals from space? Why do you think they've done this? Well, because they knew something to think it's possible. Tesla was already on it. Tesla spoke in confidence with several of his benefactors, including Colonel John Jacob Astor, who owned the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. These benefactors listened to Tesla and secretly founded what was the beginning of humanity's first battle to gain control of its own destiny, a battle set in motion by Nikola Tesla. While this information seems absolutely incredible, Tesla gave occasional hints of his plight in various newspaper and magazine interviews. So look who is involved in all of this. John Jacob Astor, a Jew belonging to an elite of a series of families that we have already seen and denounced what they have been doing from many years ago. There is no need to even mention the names or the organization, right? And that they work for someone, of course. Tesla dealt with this subject in an article called Talking with the Planets, published in the Collier's weekly newspaper, March 1901. When I was improving my machines for the production of intense electrical signals, I was also perfecting the means to observe weak signals. One of the most interesting results was the development of certain devices to indicate, at a distance of hundreds of miles, an approaching storm, its direction, speed, and distance traveled. It was while continuing this work that I first discovered those mysterious signs that had aroused unusual interest. I had perfected the aforementioned apparatus in my laboratory in the mountains of Colorado. I could feel the pulse of the planet, noting every electrical change that occurred within a radius of 1,100 miles. I will never be able to forget the first sensations I experienced when I realized that I had observed something, possibly of incalculable consequences for humanity. I felt as if I were witnessing the birth of a new knowledge or the revelation of a great truth. My first observations terrified me, since something mysterious, not to say supernatural, was present in them, and I was alone in my laboratory at night. But at that time, I still had no idea that these signals were intelligently controlled. The changes I noticed were taking place periodically and in such a clear sense of sequence that they were not attributable to any cause known to me. I was, of course, familiar with such electrical disturbances as those produced by the sun, the northern lights, and terrestrial currents, and I was sure as I could be of any fact that these variations were not due to any of these causes. The nature of my experiments precluded the possibility that the changes were being produced by atmospheric disturbances, as has been lightly suggested by some. It was some time later when the idea dawned on me that the signals I had observed could be due to intelligence control. Things to do with electricity, eh? Remember how God and Ellen White talk or write about the electric impulses. Practically everything works with this, like our body, but many other things also. What emanated from Jesus to heal? That. And what emanates from Satan to do practically the same thing? Well, also electricity. And Ellen White writes that through electricity, Satan uses people to do miracles, laying on hands, and in this way healing. Look how Satan always copies God practically the same way, only at his turning point he does his diversion, and that's it. Well, as you can see, intelligent control. Although I couldn't decipher their meaning, it was impossible for me to think of them as entirely accidental. The feeling that I have been the first to hear the greetings from one planet to another is constantly growing in me. He believed this. That's from one planet to the other. Hello, how are you? Well, some purpose was behind these electrical signals. Decades later, on his birthday in 1937, he announced in the New York Times, "I have devoted much of my time during the past year to perfecting a new, small and compact apparatus by which energy in large quantities can now be sent to through interstellar space at any distance without the slightest scattering." Tesla never publicly revealed any technical details of his improved transmitter, but in his 1937 announcement, he revealed a new formula. The kinetic and potential energy of a body is the result of motion and is determined by the product of its mass and the square of its speed. If the mass is reduced, the energy is reduced in the same proportion. If it is reduced to zero, the energy is likewise zero for any finite speed. Why has so little been written about Tesla's belief that he had heard alien radio signals? Tesla had apparently spent several years trying to translate the mysterious signals he heard in 1899. His basic interpretation of these signals was that creatures from other planets, Martians, as the slang called them at the time, were secretly here on Earth. They had infiltrated humanity for centuries and had controlled events and people in order to lead humanity on a path of evolutionary development. And essentially, they were responsible for the human beings on the planet. So there were Martians between us that acted, that wanted to guide humanity because they were feeling responsible for the human beings? What extraterrestrials are among us? The angels, those of God and those of Satan. Something had happened and something he had perceived. In addition, Tesla discovered that the overall temperature of the planet was slowly rising, what we know today as global warming. Tesla thought that this was being produced by natural conditions, as well as artificial and extraterrestrial interference. A natural matter, yes, maybe. Yes, but also something external there was as well. With this in mind, we can now look at some of the reasons for Tesla's eccentric behavior in the later years of his life. Tesla became obsessed with creating devices to end the war and unite humanity against what he perceived to be the common enemy: aliens. What would we say? The what? The devils? He talked often about death rays and wingless torpedoes that could fly through the air without propellants, possibly one of the earliest mentions of flying saucers. Look how they are doing a conjunction of two concepts: flying saucers and extraterrestrials. They move with that who? Well, we know that it could be aliens. Yes? No. They are beings that come from heaven, but they belong to the dark side. But we'll continue seeing more things because, of course, he applied his knowledge and he could put it into practice. And later we're going to see some images that might surprise you. And now let's see what Tesla tells us in his diaries. The development of man is vitally dependent on invention. It is the most important product of his creative brain. His most important purpose is the complete mastery of the mind over the material world and the adaptation of the forces of nature to human needs. This is the difficult task of the inventor that is often misunderstood and unrewarded. In my youth, I suffered from a peculiar condition due to the appearance of images. often accompanied by strong flashes of light, which distorted the vision of real objects and interfered with my thoughts and actions. Do you realize that something appeared that was very unusual? What kind of manifestations? There were pictures of things and scenes that I hadn't really seen or imagined. When a word was said to me, the image of the object it designated would present itself vividly in my vision, and sometimes I was unable to distinguish whether what I saw was tangible or not. The theory I formulated was that the images were the result of an action reflection from my brain acting on the retina when under great excitement. They were certainly not hallucinations such as those produced by sick and anguished minds. Someone acted on his mind. To give an idea of my despair, let us suppose that I have witnessed a funeral or some other spectacle that affects the nerves. Then, inevitably, in the still of the night, a vivid picture of the scene would present itself to my eyes and persist, despite all my efforts to remove it from my inmost being. I also started seeing visions of things that bore no resemblance to reality. What would you call this? That he was mad? Or that someone was showing him things, knowledge, that he then could capture due to his intelligence for these things, thanks to his gift, the talent he had? Who was the one that was showing these things to him with these kind of apparitions and manifestations? It is what we know that they are diabolic manifestations. No more, no less. Nothing about little Martians. Manifestations of Satan or his angels. We already saw in the first conferences how more than one person had received knowledge through strange dreams. Well, where did they come from? We already saw that they were linked with things that precisely do not come from God. Here you have some different images with things that he was doing. You can see impressive rays everywhere. It was as if they were showing me ideas from some cosmic mind, hoping to make their conceptions real. As you can see, making their conceptions real through a human being. If my explanation is correct, it should be possible to project on a screen the image of any object one conceives of and make it visible. You know, this is being worked on. You know, right? To be able to project what is in your mind. Such a breakthrough would revolutionize all human relationships. I am convinced that this marvel can and will be achieved in time to come. I may add that I have spent a lot of time studying the solution of the problem. I have managed to reflect such a picture that I have seen in my mind, the mind of another person, in another room. In order to free myself from these stormy apparitions, therefore this did not come from God. If it were so, it would definitely not be stormy apparitions. I have tried to concentrate my mind on something else I have seen, and thus got temporary relief. But to achieve it, I had to continually conjure up new images. By performing these mental operations a second or third time, in order to drive away the apparitions in my vision, the remedy gradually lost all its force. Then I instinctively began to take excursions beyond the limits of the little world I was aware of, seeing new scenes. These were very veiled at first, and they disappeared when I tried to focus my attention on them. They gained strength and finally assumed the solidity of real things. I soon found that it was best achieved if I simply went deeper and deeper into my vision, gaining new impressions. And so I began to travel, of course, in my mind. Every night, and sometimes during the day, when I was alone, I started my travels. I saw new places, cities and countries. I lived there. met people and made friends. And although it sounds incredible, it is a fact that I appreciated them as much as those in real life, and with no less intensity in their manifestations. Astral travel? I did this constantly until I was 16. You can see that he was young. The satanic matters grabbed him already when he was young. Then my thoughts turned to inventions. As a result of that, I did not need models, drawings, or experiments. I could represent them all as true in my mind. Thus, I have been unconsciously led to evolve what I consider to be a new method of materializing inventive concepts and ideas, which is radically contrary to the purely experimental. He says that he was unconsciously led, guided, but in my opinion much more expeditious and efficient. By the time one builds a device to put an idea into practice, one inevitably finds oneself limited to the details of the device. As you improve it, the force of concentration diminishes, and the great underlying principle is lost sight of. Results can be obtained, but always at the sacrifice of quality. My method is different. I don't really rush into real work. When I get an idea, I immediately start building it in my imagination. I change the build, redo improvements, and operate the device in my mind. It is absolutely the same whether I run a turbine in my mind or test it in my workshop. I can even tell if it's out of adjustment. There is no difference. The results are equals. In this way, I am able to quickly develop and refine an idea without using anything. When I don't see bugs anywhere, I put this final product into concrete form in my brain. Invariably, my device works as I have envisioned it should, and the experiment goes exactly as I have planned. In 20 years, there has not been a single exception. Why should it be any other way? I had observed that the appearance of images was always preceded by actual visions of scenes under very peculiar and generally very exceptional conditions. I soon became aware, to my surprise, that every thought I conceived was suggested by an external impression. You can see, from an external impression. Not only this, but all my actions were prompted in a similar way. In time it became perfectly evident to me that I was simply an automation endowed with energy of movement, responding to the stimulation of the sense organs and thinking and acting accordingly. See, through the sense organs. How does Satan act on mankind? Through his senses, to capture him, distorting the senses that were given by God. He modifies them, and through there, bam, he achieves what he is looking for in man. Definitely, in this moment it is important to remember the conferences that our partner is doing, referring to all the mental area, because they are being masterful, and I think very guided by God, to show these mental mechanisms and how Satan works on them as God can as well. In time it became perfectly evident to me that I was simply an automation endowed with the energy of movement, responding to the stimulation of the sense organs and thinking and acting accordingly. Well, here you have an image of him. The practical result of this was the kind of tele-automation that has been carried out only imperfectly. Its latent possibilities, however, will eventually be demonstrated. I have been planning self-controlled automata for years, and I believe that mechanisms can be produced that will act as though they have reason to a limited degree and create an industrial revolution. Do you realize what he is saying? Remember all the robots that we've been showing, how they are also working so that they themselves can learn new knowledge, etc., etc. I was about 12 years of age when I succeeded in banishing the image from my vision at will, but I never had any control over the flashes of light to which I have referred above. Well, that's quite something, eh? They were perhaps my strangest and most inexplicable experiences. They usually happened when I was in dangerous or desperate situations, or when I was elated. So in alterations, right? Notice this with the senses. In some cases, I have seen all the air around me filled with flames. Its intensity, instead of diminishing, increased with time, apparently peaking when I was 25 years old. While I was in Paris in 1883, a prominent French manufacturer sent me an invitation to a shooting expedition, which I accepted. I had been confined for a long time in the factory, and the fresh air had a wonderful, invigorating effect. Well, you see, he mentions fresh air, just like the advice that is given to us by God through Ellen White, right? Upon my return to the city at night, I felt a sensation that my brain had caught fire. I was alight, as if a little sun was there, and I spent the whole night applying cold compresses to my tortured head. Eventually, the flashes lessened in strength and frequency, but it took more than 3 weeks before they ceased completely. When a second invitation was extended to me, my response was an emphatic no. These light phenomena still show up from time to time, like when a new idea is breaking through, but they are no longer exciting. When I close my eyes, I invariably see first a background of a very dark and uniform blue, similar to the sky on a clear night, but without stars. In a few seconds, this field becomes animated with countless flakes of sparkling green, arranged in several layers and advancing towards me. Then there appears to the right a beautiful pattern of 2 systems of closely parallel lines with right angles between the systems, with all kinds of colors, with yellow, green and gold predominating. Right after, the lines get brighter and everything is dotted with flickering points of light. This box moves slowly across the field of view and in about 10 seconds fades to the left, leaving behind a rather unsightly grey base. Every time before I fall asleep, images of people or objects flutter before my eyes. My. When I see them, I know I'm about to lose consciousness. If they were absent, it meant a sleepless night. During this period, I contracted many strange habits, some of which I can trace to being caused by external impressions, while others are inexplicable. I was fascinated with the sparkle of crystals, but the pearls almost gave me a fit. After finishing my studies at the Polytechnic Institute and at the university, I had a complete nervous breakdown, and while the illness lasted, I observed many strange and incredible phenomena. So far, a small extract from his strange diaries. If we did not know what we know about the forces of evil, who's the clever one that can understand all of this? No, they are extraterrestrials. They are aliens. Yes? Well, thank goodness that after 80 conferences and other things, Bible studies, we have been able to verify the power of the devil and his angels to do these things, and that there is no doubt that it comes from him. From Tesla's own writings, we can see that he had a unique mental capacity that few of his fellow humans have been able to achieve. It's no wonder that when Tesla was faced with such a shocking event as the revelation that humans might not be alone in the universe, he stood tall. The unusual way in which he faced and dealt with the unknown has led some to speculate that his true origin may lie beyond this planet. Imagine to what point nonsense is said. This suggestion is not new, as Tesla once confided to one of his personal assistants that he often felt as if he were a stranger in this world. Tesla's father was an Orthodox priest, while his mother was not literate, but she was highly intelligent. A dreamer with a poetic touch who, as he matured, added to these early qualities those of self-discipline and a penchant for precision. See that certain peculiarities of one's character are noticed by the angels, and those of God know it. But Satan, that has known mankind for many years, and is aware of every faculty of each human being, to know where to enter them. Margaret Cheney, in her book Tesla, Man Out of Time, observed that Tesla as a child began to make original inventions. When he was 5 years old, he built a small water wheel quite different from the ones he had seen in the field. It was smooth, without paddles, and yet it turned evenly in the current. Years later, he would recall this fact when he was designing his unique bladeless turbine. Some of his other experiments were less successful. He once was up on the rooftop, clutching the family umbrella, and hyperventilating in the cool mountain breeze, until his body felt light and he was convinced he could fly. But he fell unconscious and was carried to bed by his mother. Tesla would later write that this incident was the catalyst for his unusual visions. So all we've mentioned, but also a bump. In her book, The Return of the Dove, Margaret Strom affirms that Tesla was not an earthly man. Well, she can affirm whatever she likes. In her book, it says that people from space reported that a male child was born aboard a spaceship that was in flight from Venus to Earth in July 1856. Well, and this is where we start to say complete nonsense. The little boy was named Nikola. The ship landed at midnight between July the 9th and the 10th in a remote province in the mountains in what is today Croatia. There, as planned, the boy was placed in the care of a good man and his wife, Reverend Milutin and Duca Tesla. Sounds like the story of Superman. Supposedly, space people released this information in 1947 to Arthur H. Matthews in Quebec, Canada. Arthur H. Matthews was an electrical engineer who had been associated with Tesla since his childhood. Matthews claimed that Tesla entrusted him with many ideas, including Tesla's device for interplanetary communications, which was conceived in 1901 with the goal of communicating with the planet Mars. Tesla has suggested that he could transmit large amounts of energy from the ground and air over distances of thousands of miles. I can easily bridge the gulf that separates us from Mars and send a message almost as easily as Chicago. Due to other research at the time, the first model was not built by Tesla until 1918. On July 16, 1981, NBC reported that the Soviet Union had subjected the northwestern United States to low-frequency bombardments for several years. Those radio waves were placed under bioelectric frequencies. In technical language, they are designed as ELF waves, extremely low frequency. They were discovered at the beginning of this century by Nikola Tesla. Tesla collaborated with Edison in 1884, but it didn't take him long to separate from Edison, since he did not share his convictions on how to produce electricity. He then began working with his competitor George Westinghouse. The first alternative current power plant built by Westinghouse and Tesla was put into operation in 1892 in Niagara Falls. A short time later, Tesla was projected into a super scientific space where, to our knowledge, no researcher at the time was able to follow him. Only the banker J.P. Morgan, you know who he is, representative of the Rothschild in the United States, apparently related to the Illuminati, and who had already financed Westinghouse, seemed to have understood the scope of Tesla's inventions. This had begun to use the energy field that surrounds the Earth by filling the space, formerly called ether, to obtain energy from it, obviously free. At the same time, he used the energy field for different forms of communication and for the transmission of energy. Power sources such as coal, oil, and water power, as well as high-voltage power lines, became redundant. Ships, cars, planes, factories, houses could draw energy directly from the energy field of the ether. By the end of 1898, on the occasion of his experiments in Colorado Springs, financed by J.P. Morgan, Tesla was prepared to produce energy from ether. Today, this technology is called gravitational energy conversion of tachyon energy. Morgan had understood very well the scope of this invention, the monopolies of electricity, oil, gasoline, coal, etc. They were threatened. For this reason, he had the work stopped and the Tesla Center in Colorado Springs destroyed. However, Tesla did not resign. Until his death, which occurred on January 7, 1943, he accumulated a multitude of inventions. Some were revolutionary and others of such importance that even today it is barely measurable. His inventions could, even in our 20th century, transform the Earth into a paradise in a short time, which, as you know, is not what those who steer the helm want. In addition to his machine for capturing energy from the ether and making it usable, in 1931 Tesla built a solid-state converter. It powered a special electric motor that's placed in a heavy limousine proved to have the same performance as a normal gasoline engine. They did the test with the car at 130 kilometers per hour for a week, fuel consumption 0. That device, the size of a wine box, produced enough energy to supply the needs of an entire family. Tesla also managed to artificially cause earthquakes thanks to the induction of vibrations in the tachyon field, the consequence of which is to transmit vibrations to matter. One day, Tesla was subjected to an earthquake of this kind to an entire block of buildings on a street in New York. In addition to the patents for remote-controlled vehicles in 1898, he also invented wireless power transmission. But within the framework of our subject, what is mainly of interest is the discovery of stationary waves, of which we will speak later, and extremely low frequencies, also called the Tesla effect. And like this, it continues and continues, and it continues presenting more things. I don't know if there's another thing that I wanted to point out for you, but anyway, I'm going to pass on the images slowly so that you can read it at home when this conference is uploaded. There is nothing to miss in the whole article. And well, let's go on, and we're going to see now some photographs and plans of UFOs of the Third Reich. There are many people that do not know about this fact, but you've already seen from where this concept comes from Nikola Tesla, through truly satanic visions. Did you know that the Third Reich, the Nazis of Hitler, had prepared UFOs? Well, we are going to see different images of those plans, of how they worked with different names of projects. Some of them even long-shaped. Curiously, some of the apparitions of UFOs that have been commented, some of them are quite long, and they say that they are the motherships, etc. We're going to see some images, and with this we are going to finish. Even newspapers of Buenos Aires between 1977 and 1978 that talked about strange objects like this, and well, more flat. In this article, it talked about someone from Montevideo. That's precisely a Uruguayan. That was not Uruguayan, he was Austrian. That talked precisely that the UFO matter was linked with the Nazis, and that they did not think of themselves as lost with the war, and they carried on working on this in different places after so many years of the war, of course. You can see the different schematics they had, even photographs. All of this is at the time of the Second World War. In Italy also, articles appear of the year 1950 of strange flying saucers, and they link it precisely with Mussolini, Hitler, etc. More photographs. As you can see, even with the cross that symbolized the German nation. And notice that these are the characteristic shapes that have been appearing from many years ago until now. More photographs, more diagrams, even their functionality. Well, all of these things were the ones that Nikola Tesla received, and thanks to the fact that he knew how to capture it, someone used that knowledge to be able to manage to make these things, these objects. If we realize, why do you think that Satan was so interested in passing on knowledge to a human being of something that could become a reality and that could finally manage to fly, and in truly impressive ways? Well, why do you think Satan invents this? Does Satan invent this? Do you really think that Satan invents anything? Here you have a photograph of how they say the propulsion of these Nazi UFOs worked. Does this ring a bell, this movement of energy? We already saw it in the first part of these conferences. It is the energy that moves the universe, they say. Well, these work exactly the same. If all of this, Satan transmitted this knowledge to a scientist so that the human being could create it, we have proved through these 80 conferences that Satan does not invent absolutely anything apart from evil. Where do you think Satan got this? How did he arrive to earth with his angels? Hitchhiking? Just flapping wings? They have wings, truly. That is how it is manifested clearly. But evidently, they move in other apparatus. We've seen it, how in the Bible it is described exactly the same with the angels of God. Satan, the only thing he's doing is transmit something with which they also move on. And that there's something they are preparing for a future time, very close, in which Satan is going to do his apparition. You know that that is his objective. Simulate the coming of the Messiah, and in that manner to end up captivating the whole world. Well, I thank you very much for coming, for putting up with so many hours of conferences, of the double session that we've had today. And simply, I'd like to comment that what you're going to see in this video that we're going to show, it's not going to be one, there are going to be two about the same person, and it will be accompanied with some testimonies, personal ones, of a great friend I have in Mexico, that he knows precisely the man that you're going to see in the video, and that they have shared an experience together. And we are going to show also his own testimony before certain things that he has lived. All of this, if it is God's will be to link also, or to join it together, with the biblical texts that we still have to see, and the Ellen White's quotes that will finish to give us the light that is needed to determine once more what is from God and what are Satan's plagiarisms. Well, I hope that you have been well entertained for these many hours. Thank you very much for your attention, and may God bless you.